Michelle Neff-Hernandez. I am the Executive Director and the founder of Soaring Spirits International. For those of you who have not yet heard of Soaring Spirits, we provide research-based programs and practical tools, as well as a community of support for widowed people around the world. We have been working with widowed people for 12 years, and widowed people are our passion. So everyone who works with Soaring Spirits, 99.9% are widowed themselves. And so we bring to the experience of working with and providing programs for widowed people our own widowed experience as well. And that is actually one of the topics that we're going to speak about today. So as I said at the beginning, our topic today is leaning on your widowhood when things get tough. As I said, I'm Michelle Neff-Hernandez. I am delighted to be joined by a panel of other awesome widowed people who I've had the great pleasure of working with in a variety of ways. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So we're going to start with a TEDx speaker, and this Tanya Villanueva Tepper was also featured in Project Rebirth, which was a special project done for 9/11 survivors. And I will let her talk to you a little bit more about that. But Tanya, I'm delighted to have you. So if you could do a little introduction.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Michelle. Yes, I'm Tanya Villanueva Tepper. I was widowed on September 11th, 2001, when my fiance Sergio answered the call to the World Trade Center and never came home. It was a very difficult journey in that initial aftermath of not knowing if he was coming home, if he was missing, if he was going to be recovered, all of that. And what saved me was the fire department had set up a counseling unit and support groups pretty early on. And being in group with other widows who were grieving for the same reason at the same time was really what saved my life. Fast forward, I took part in this documentary project called Rebirth, which has its home at the 9/11 National Museum. And they followed us from 2002 to 2010, documenting what our journey was like through grief and healing. And they also filmed different significant events that happened along the way. For me, I was able to get married again. I have 2 daughters. And when the movie was released on the 10th anniversary in 2011, I started to hear from other widows saying how helpful it was to see my journey and how hopeful it was for them to be able to see that they could potentially get through it also. And that was kind of what led me on my path to finding how I could start to give back to the widow community. And I did a simple Google search for widowed support and came up with the Widowed Village, which is a program of Soaring Spirits International. And that's a 24-hour chat forum for any of you who aren't aware. It's a great resource for you. It was in the Widowed Village that I found out about Camp Widow, which is our signature program, a weekend-long, I call it a retreat, where widows come together and they participate in workshops and roundtable discussions and fun, if I can say. It's actually fun to go to Camp Widow, and mostly community. And I've been going since 2013. It's been definitely very fulfilling on so many levels for me, and it's brought all of the meaning to my loss to be able to help widows on the journey after me. So that's who I am.
Thank you so much, Tanya.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful to have you. Our next speaker, Tom Ward, walks with families through traumatic loss and also does outreach with supporting military families and has done so much wonderful work with Soaring Spirits over the years. We're delighted to have him with us today. Tom, if you would please, and give us a little bit of an introduction. Tom, I think we still have you muted. Sorry to cut in. I just want to make sure everyone can hear you.
Thanks. How's
There we
that?
are. Now we're
Okay.
good.
Hi,
Thank
everyone.
you.
My name is Tom. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm 74 years old. When I was 50 and my wife was 47, my wife, and I was a witness to my wife's homicide. It occurred in our home and involved obviously a family member. So that was 24 years ago. And it's fair to say that that event fractured our family, and especially my wife's family. So I don't ever want to equate our loss with anyone else's loss, but it was something that we were totally unprepared for. So the journey since that time, I continued working, and I struggled, and I spent a lot of effort trying to heal the wounds of so many people in our family. And I found that task to be daunting and almost unreachable for me alone. So over time, I would say that much of our trauma has resolved somewhat. It varies by who's, who, how they related to my wife, and how they related to our children, and how they related to me. So I'm in a much better place. I've really taken time to work on my own recovery, and I've had a lot of professional help. And now I got to a point about 10 years ago where I could finally reach out to lend a hand to others. And I'm especially drawn to military veterans, especially war veterans. And I actually started a nonprofit in Texas that assists veteran families from Iraq and Afghanistan. So my come by Camp Widow via trauma, I didn't discover the fellowship available through Camp Widow until I had 19 years on my own. And that was a turning point for me, to meet 350 to 400 people at a conference, and we all had something in common. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
We're so glad to have you. And I especially love that you share that when you came to us, your experience was 19 years, because so many times we make the assumption that the support that's available through a widowed community is really only necessary in the early stages. And my experience, my loss has been 15 years this year. My experience is that this sense of community is an ongoing part of my meaning, the meaning of my life. And so I'm really grateful always to be able to share that with people, however long it has been since they've experienced the death of their spouse or partner. So welcome, Tom. Thank you so much for being here. And last but certainly not least, Leslie Streeter, who is the author of the recently released book, Black Widow. I'm so glad you've got one there, and has been just a delightful presence at our Camp Widow events as a speaker. As it relates to writing, I'll let her tell you a little bit more about her story, but Leslie, I'm so delighted to have you. So please, an introduction.
The weird feedback is bad. I'll talk over it.
You know what? There we go.
There you go. Okay, so my name is Leslie Grace Streeter. I am a reporter and a columnist in West Palm Beach, Florida. And 5 years ago, this July, my husband Scott, who was 44 at the time, almost 45, had a heart attack in front of me as we were making out. And I say this because if people go, what? That's really personal. But A, it's super shocking. B, I didn't have that thing that some widowed people have where you go, were we getting along? Were we talking? Was there anything between us? There was not. So everything was super cool until that point. I think maybe my signature, it's not a thing, it's just sort of how I am, is that I deal with these things with humor. Michelle talked about my book. The subtitle is A Sad, Funny Journey Through Grief for People Who Normally Avoid Books with words like journey in the title, which is not to say anything against the word journey. I was not that person. None of us wanted to be in this situation. No one wants to be an expert on widowhood. No one wants to be an expert on grief, certainly not from a personal perspective. But Michelle said earlier that, I think this was before we start recording, but that this happened to us, and what do you do with it? And because I'm obviously a person who talks a lot and likes words and stuff, I said I'll write about this, both therapeutically to get it out, and because I felt like there were people like myself for many reasons. Before my book came out, Tim Locke's book From Scratch had not come out. So until that point, there had not yet been a majorly released story about widowhood from a Black perspective. And she was younger than me when her widowhood happened. So there was that situation, there was the parenthood, and basically just sort of like going, here's my stuff, and hope that you relate. And I've had people from so many communities, from the adoption community, because our son is adopted, to African-American widows, to those who have kids, to just people who, like me, I'm spiritual, but I'm not like a person that goes, and I'm going to take these 5 steps and do this thing. And here's a thing that has butterflies on it. And there's some people who relate to that, but I am not. I told them, like, this setup is like I'm a hoarder. Not really. I'm just messy. This is the only clean part of my house, and I'm all over the place. So I figured if I was just real, that people would be real back to me. And that is part of what I think the success of the message, not the book, but of the message has been, is that there's no one way to do this. And that's one of the things that Camp Widow, which I found as I was writing the book, I actually wrote part of it at Camp Widow in Tampa, just in my room going, my kid's not here, I can do this. And I felt the support of it was that I was looking for places to speak and talk and to commune with people. And it was right up the road in Tampa. And I found out like a couple months before it happened. I said, do you have any space? And Michelle was like, yes, we do. Come on in. And you can't get rid of me. I've been here ever since. So
well, we're not even trying to get rid of you. So that's a good thing. Thank you so much. Well, I'm delighted to have all of you with me today. I'm super grateful for your willingness to share your experiences with us. So let me talk a little bit about why we chose this topic. As you know, first, I also want to just acknowledge and thank Open to Hope for creating this wonderful conference and pulling together so many different professionals from so many different aspects of the grief experience. I love that Open to Hope addresses just every kind of relationship. And so they're going to be talking to grieving parents and grieving children and grieving siblings and people who've experienced this death of their spouse or partner, as well as friends. They just really do such a great job of addressing loss from so many different angles. So thank you very much, Open to Hope, for doing this and for also including us. We're delighted to be able to offer this workshop today. So when I was approached by Open to Hope and asked if we would participate, I thought a lot about what would we want to offer. And I'll tell you that the conversations that I've been having with widowed people over the last several months have all been kind of focused on what is it like to live through this time in the world, which includes both a pandemic and social injustice on a very large scale, and all of these kind of vulnerabilities coming together, including everything from sheltering at home by yourself without seeing anyone for months and months, to juggling a full-time job, doing remote schooling with small children, and trying to maintain your sanity while being the only adult in your household, as well as blended families. Just like every kind of experience has kind of been put under a microscope in this new sort of unprecedented time. So the conversations I've been having with widowed people have been around how this time of in the world has increased their feelings of vulnerability, increased their anxiety, increased in many ways their grief experience. They have this intensity of feeling that's new. Some of them maybe have been widowed a long time and are suddenly like, why am I feeling so like I feel like I was doing really well and this has tossed me backwards. And so what I wanted to talk about today, and I'm delighted to be able to ask the perspective of our panelists, is about how can we take what our widowhood has taught us and use that in other difficult life experiences. And I'm using words very carefully here because I think sometimes we can one of the platitudes that we might hear in grief is that, we're going to learn so many beautiful lessons, and that these beautiful lessons are going to help us create another beautiful life. And here's the thing about platitudes is that a lot of times there's an underlying truth there. It's just that it's padded, with butter or something, and turned into something you're supposed to take as delicious and say, thank you so much. And so it doesn't negate the truth of it. And the truth of it is, for me, is that we as widowed people can do hard things. And the reason we know that is because we experienced the death of someone we probably thought we couldn't live without. And so when we have walked through that, and in every stage from, I remember so clearly thinking, how do you plan a funeral? Is that a thing? I didn't have that sense. I'd never planned a funeral before. I didn't have anyone near me die before my husband died. And for those of you who don't know me, I forgot that I didn't introduce myself. My husband was killed in a cycling accident 15 years ago, my Philip, and his death led me to seek out other widowed people. And when I found them, I wanted to gather them all in one place and say, let's have a tribe. And so we have, and that communing has resulted in Soaring Spirits International. And our purpose is to continue to give that opportunity for people to gather. So in that gathering, I think, is where we discover the hard things that we've done and how other people have walked through their hard things and what they've learned from their experience. Now, when I say that, I also want to talk about the fact that we learn about ourselves. So when we say, we've learned lessons, that often to me sounds like something you read in a book and then you absorbed, and then you've got it. Now I have this lesson, I've learned it. But I think that the key thing for me is what I learned about myself in my widowhood, and that what I learned about myself, including the fact that I could do hard things, has been something I can lean on in every circumstance that's been hard after that. And I can say that confidently, in every single one. And so I'd like to begin there. I'm going to give my panelists a heads up that that's going to be your first question, is what have you learned about yourself that has served you well as you move forward into other tough situations? And I'll begin by answering that question myself to give you a minute to think about it. But one of the things that I have learned about myself is that I have a tendency to carry burdens alone, and that I don't really like it when people offer me help. But here's what my widowhood taught me, is that help mattered, that reaching out and asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Instead, it is a wise way of helping you get the help and the support and the resources that you need, and that carrying the burden by yourself, doesn't make you Wonder Woman. And if you'd asked me before my widowhood, I 100% would have told you that if you can carry it on your own, you should. And so what I have learned is that I need people, and that in needing people, I have the opportunity to both receive and then offer the support. And so I think what I didn't really know is that unless you're willing to receive support, you can't truly offer it, because there is no reciprocity. And people feel like, oh, well, you say you want to offer me support, but every time I try to give you something, you refuse it. And so I didn't realize that carrying it on my own kind of put me in my own little box, and it didn't welcome people in. But when I allowed people into my life at a time when I had been broken down to the point where I just didn't feel capable, then I realized what a gift it was for both of us, for me to be able to accept the loving support that I was offered at that time. And truly, that's changed my life. That absolutely has changed the way I think about what strength means. It's changed the way I think about what it means to offer support to someone, because I realize that that's also a gift, and accepting their support is a gift to them, and what an important gift that is. So that's one thing that has helped me to see myself in a different way. And so I think I'm looking at Leslie. So Leslie, is it okay if I start with you?
Yes. I think the first thing I learned is that when you, as a widowed person, if you say to people, I am widowed, and you put out there in the universe that you want people, that you're available to talk to you, people will. I mean, I know all of us have been the person, even not with Camp Widow, we've been the people that someone will call you and say, my coworker just lost her husband, my niece, my whatever, can you talk to them? And you find out, and at first it's scary because you're like, what if I screw these people up? I don't know anything. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a social worker. I'm just like a lady in a messy bedroom. And so I've learned that I know so much more than I thought. And even though my personality is that I'm like human jazz hands, I'm all over the place, that I have found that I am so much more focused than I thought I was, and so much more proactive about helping people, because I've always been very social and had lots of friends. I had 10 bridesmaids. It was a nightmare, but I'm that person. But I always thought that it was just like, it's just fun, we'll kind of hang out. But I found that having to think this way, when someone calls you and says, how do I get through this? Who do I talk to? Why do people not leave me alone? Or will people leave me alone enough? And you have answers, and then I'm able to synthesize and whatever's milling around in this head pretty quickly. And that was really exciting to me, because I figure if there's a situation like this that I had to go through, like I said before, if I can use that to help people, I think it's cool. So yeah.
I love that. Yeah. And it's interesting to realize, I think, that your perspective matters. And even if they weren't going to do it exactly like you did, just the fact that you'd be willing to share what your experience was gives them the freedom to have a sense like, oh, okay, so if you did that, then it's probably okay that I'm doing fill in the blank. So it's a gift, right? Every time when people can have someone to talk to. Absolutely. Tom, how about you? And just so you know, you're muted right now. So I'm just going to give you that warning. Tom, you're muted. Still muted. Hey, Tom, I think we still have you muted, just so you know.
Okay, I'm back. How's
There
this?
we go. Now we got
Okay.
you. Okay.
I want to pick up on what Leslie just shared. I don't walk around with a shirt that says, ask me. I certainly don't do that. But it has become known naturally however, that I am available to not necessarily retell my story, but I'm an available person. So thank you for reminding me of that. That's a beautiful thing to be able to share that. When I remember being first widowed, I didn't have a clue who to go to or who to ask anything about. But one of the biggest things I've learned over time is that I was previously more focused on long range thoughts and long range plans. When I say long range, I'm talking about 2 years, 3 years, 5-year plan. I didn't necessarily have those written in stone, but I was always conscious of where am I going to take my career, or where am I going to go? Where are we going to move next? And being widowed and being suddenly widowed and having my life suddenly changed. Over time, one of the lessons I've learned is to super focus on now. The moments really count. And there's a lot of nows in a 24-hour day. My gosh, there's a lot of nows. And I think I may have missed a bunch of those when I was kind of focused one eye on long range, 3 years, 5 years, or whatever. Not that I would dismiss that, but my focus is really on now. And what it's done, it's stretched my days. My days, I describe them as 28-hour days. I don't work 28 hours a day, but I've got more time now. I've got more energy because I'm focused on what am I doing now, and what's the most important thing that has to be done now, and what's the most important thing that needs to be done possibly next as a result of what I just did now. So that's my lesson, is more focused on now.
What I love about that, Tom, is that also at this time, while we're all working through all of the things that are happening in the world right now, I think it's worthwhile also to remember that the day is made up of so many nows, because otherwise we lose right now in the midst of what might happen, right? And so it's such a good reminder to come back to that now during the times when it feels like everything is so uncertain, but I do have right now. And to be able to come back to that is such a great reminder. Thank you so much for that. Tanya, I would like to come to you next.
It's so funny, Tom, because I was going to say that grief taught me, I think it's the biggest master teacher in learning to stay present. Because, you know, when you're grieving, I think the biggest pain that we feel when we're grieving is really having to let go of what our expectations were for the future. There's just so much, that to me was the most painful part, I think, was letting go of all of those future plans and expectations I had with Sergio, expectations for a family. There was so much pain in that. And once I started to focus more on what I did have and what I continue to carry with me, our love, which never dies, our memories, which gave me strength and, you know, made me laugh, lifted me up in times of just complete sorrow. Like in that, I was able to feel the gratitude, which is really hard, I think, in the beginning to like go to that space of gratitude when you're dealing with such tremendous loss. But it did kind of like letting go of those expectations by staying present. Okay, what do I have now? What can I focus on now? That has served me so well moving forward. And knowing too that I was resourceful, knowing that I needed help, like you said, Michelle, and knowing that I could find those avenues for help, you know, that it was within me to do that, that I was like the captain of my ship, that if I needed to get through this with somebody, that I was going to be able to find the resources to do it. That served me well. Because when I did get married, I had my two beautiful daughters. In a few years, my first daughter was 3 years old and she was diagnosed with autism, right? And here goes the expectations, like, but wait a second, I expected to have a child with no challenges, you know? And then it was like, well, you've been here before, you know, let go of those expectations. What can you do to empower yourself through this new challenge? And it was my widowed experience. It was like, okay, I got to find community. Let me find other families who have children so I can understand what it is that I'm confronting, right? That was the big one, was community. Let me learn whatever it is I can learn, that I can, you know, steps that I can take to help her in the best way, to help her fulfill her potential. So I think it was, for me, it was resourcefulness, staying present, and learning that the only thing I had to let go of were expectations. That's what's
I
serving me.
love that so much. And I want to just say to everyone watching that these are just exercises in what we've learned about ourselves. So as you hear us talking, I hope that it will bring up for you, what are the things, that's the question for you, what are the things that your widowhood has taught you about yourself? Because those things we carry with us into every single situation that's coming, including the one we all find ourselves currently living with. So when you hear us talking about our experiences, I hope that it will start to trigger you to think about some of the things that your widowhood has taught you. And then I would like to shift actually next to perspective. I wonder, I feel sure so many of you have seen the meme that's going around social media that basically says, you know what, you all are, you know, running around thinking that this is the worst day that's ever happened, you know, here, hold my beer. That widowed people have this sense of like, and of course what it's speaking to, right, is perspective. And so my next question is around perspective and how perspective can take everything that we're living with, just what Tanya said right now. You know, she comes to another challenge where expectations are, you know, she had one expectation and it turned into something else. And what her widowhood taught her was to release that and to look again. And so I feel like perspective is one of the major gifts for me of my grief experience, has been this huge shift in perspective. And so I'd like to talk a little bit for all of us about what that looks like for us. And I'm also going to ask you to apply it directly to the situation we're living with today. So again, I'll begin. And then, so for me, this perspective shift, I am definitely your classic type A personality. I really love perfection. I always tell people, like, in my dream world, everything is perfect. And so my grief experience taught me that perfection is impossible. And while that may seem really silly, because I should have known that before, it wasn't really until it was literally physically impossible for me to check every one of the boxes I'd created for myself that I discovered that perfection was not only not possible, but that it separated me from other people. Because, sort of to Tom's point, if you're super focused on, something else besides right now and the person in front of you, and my focus at that time was, how can I do everything perfectly? How can the world be perfect? And so that separated me from people, one, and obviously, you have this constant drive for things to be different than they are. And so for my current situation, living with the uncertainty of the world right now, I have been able to take that and say, just because I can't make it perfect doesn't mean I can't make a difference. And so to be able, instead of saying, okay, I don't know how to make this perfect, and that's everything from, my at-home office space. So, I'm remarried, and I realize I am fortunate to be sheltering at home with my husband. And also we're sheltering on 2 different floors because I have a nice tidy space. He has a less tidy space because his mind works differently than mine. But in a different world, I would have been really bothered by, the desk that he has on our dining room table. And my perspective has taught me to be grateful for the desk that's on the dining room table. Instead of saying my dining room table is not perfectly set up like I would like it to be, I say to myself, I'm super grateful that I have somebody sitting at that dining room table. And I've often said, cleaning bathrooms has changed for me since grief, because I remember thinking, like, if only my bathroom could be perfect all the time. Well, perfect bathrooms means there's no one using the bathroom in there. And so, after Phil's death, it was like, I could do without a perfect bathroom for sure. And so that perspective has really helped me shift how I look at challenges and how I look at inconveniences. And so the number of inconveniences that have been associated in lifestyle changes and all of the things that, we're mourning in a million different ways with the rest of the world, I've still been able to find within that the times that I am grateful for whatever the inconvenience has brought, because what that means is there's a person associated with that, and gratefully a person who is alive and I can still have a connection with, even if it has to be by video, and I'd prefer that it be in person. So that perspective shift for me is how I've applied it to this situation that we're living right now. And so how about if we go back to Leslie and we'll just go, oh, Tom's ready. It looks like Tom, we're gonna go Tom first. And then we'll switch Leslie, then we're coming to you, Tanya. So now we've got an order. Okay. Tom, your mute hasn't quite gone off yet. No. There we go. Oh, you had it, and then it came. Yes. It came back.
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you, Michelle. That's a beautiful question, but a beautiful prompt. What it brought me back to was, again, the importance of now. But it reminded me of the short story by Tolstoy. It's called The 3 Questions. And the 3 questions within that short story are: what is the most important thing to do? Who is the most important person? And when is the most important time? So I've been able to practice that, those parameters. I was invited by a person to reach out to a man I've never met who is recently widowed, and he was widowed about 3 months. And when I was preparing to make the first phone call to him, yes, I have 3 adult children. Yes, I have 2 grandchildren. Yes, I have this. But when I was preparing to make that phone call, I focused on, who is this person? What am I going to offer him? And when am I going to talk to him? I'm going to talk to him right now. And so during the time that I was immediately widowed, I was unable to put things in any kind of a perspective or list or sequence or order. My entire life was chaos, and for a long time. There were rays of time or moments of time where it wasn't chaotic, and yes, I could sleep, and yes, I could function, but basically my brain and was in too many places, emotionally, looking back at the past, what was, and I was unable to focus on now. So I'm leaning back to what I first shared about the first prompt, but in terms of today's crises, there's more than one, obviously. Now that you're widowed, that's another crisis that's very personal to you. And I'm not saying to throw your mask away and don't ever go back outside and forget about what's happening in the world, but try to do something, do your best to maybe light a candle and look at that candle and say, I'm going to look at this candle right now. I'm going to make this one phone call right now, and just kind of narrow your view of, from all this stuff happening around us in the world. And one of the things that people have coached us on since the virus is to pay less attention to, and spend less time looking at the media or the camera or whatever, the vicarious crises that are put on the plate every day. We don't have to pay clinical attention to those. We don't have to do that. We've got other things that we have to do. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Leslie, how about you?
I think that for me, like I mentioned before, that sometimes focus is a thing for me, but a reminder that I don't control anything. I think those of us who are widowed know that we control nothing. That's that thing, that God laughs at your plans. Like, that's cute. Literally, Michelle and Tanya both know I've been writing this book for ages, and it was coming out March 10th. And I had an entire tour, including going to Camp Widow. I had 2 readings set up in Tampa and Orlando. I was going to do BookCon in New York. I was going to be on the Today Show in April, and it all went bloop. And I went, that sucks. And then my perspective changes, because I think that sometimes when things happen to us before widowhood, I think we take things personally. And we see things in the universe and go, but what does this do to me? That literally it didn't just upend my world. And there's a group of authors who are now known as the Lockdown Literature Group, that literally our books have been released into a pandemic, which is super cute and fun. It's not. And so we've had to adjust everything. And I think that as a widowed person, as a person who deals with grief, you get really good at adjustment. You get really good at saying, I can do this. And if this isn't possible, we can do this. Or the inverse is, I don't want to. Because, for instance, those of us who were in this community, robo voice. Anyway, those of us,
there we go.
Thank you, get asked to be on boards and to do stuff and to talk. And I will talk to anybody's widowed friend at any time of the night. What I cannot do is commit to being on everybody's board. Can you speak at this thing? Can you do this thing? Because we know, Tom mentioned, self-care is so important, and having to say, I will be aware of what's happening in the world, but I cannot inject myself into everything, particularly as a person who's African-American. What's happening with the racial reckoning that this country's been ignoring for 200 years, it's finally happening, which I'm sorry it's happening violently. I'm sorry it's happening because of the way it is, but it's about freaking time that we talk about this. However, I have said to people, okay, listen, if I haven't talked to you in 10 years, you can't just show up in my DMs at 10 o'clock at night because you don't have any Black people to talk to about stuff. Widows, yes. Random people who need someone Black to talk to, no. You can do that in the afternoon, but you can't do it right now. And I think what Tom is saying, my perspective of saying, I can help the people I can help, but I can't give more. I can't be the giving tree. I can't give all my branches and then have nothing left for myself. So while I'm very excited about, not in a yay it's happening way, but excited in a it's here, let's do this kind of way with everything that's happening. And the COVID, I'll stop talking in a minute, but COVID has helped, I think, expose how selfish we are. Like Tom was saying, it's like no one's saying it's hard with the masks and, how are you going to construct your life? But, just because you really want a taco doesn't mean there's no thing anymore and that you can't bring it back. And I think once again, as a widow person, as a grief person who is now sort of a spokesperson for the grief, we have learned how to take care of other people. So if you say to us, listen, you going out and breathing on somebody might bring something back to your grandma, I think we understand the precariousness of life. And from that perspective, I think we might be less selfish in a way that is good, selfish in ways that help protect our sanity. So we have something to give, but completely unselfish and giving in a way that says, can I just order the taco?
I really love that. And I'm so glad you brought up, Leslie, the point of view of, being very engaged in what's happening in the world as, we have this racial this reckoning, and yet also being able to say, but I can't do it all. And being able, and that doesn't mean that what you can do doesn't matter. It also doesn't mean that you don't care. It means that we each have an amount of energy that is available to us. And I want to remind everyone who, is watching, is that wherever you are in your widowhood, there's a difference in how much energy you have to spend. And so, and whether there are many pulls on your time aside from, just remember that like grief, it calls to you to manage, to pay attention, to be a part of it. And it will keep pulling you if you're ignoring it. And so we all have only a limited amount of energy, and choosing where you spend that consciously does not mean you don't care. It means that you are aware that you are one person and that you also have to be whole in order to participate in any way. And if you give away all the branches, right, then you're down to just the trunk, and hopefully you can grow some more branches. So that's the thing, is that we have to make those choices. And I'm grateful, that you brought it up, especially in that way, particularly because I know there are people who are thinking how much, like feeling guilty about how much can I do? Am I participating enough? Am I participating in the right way? And then adding the grief element to it, sometimes we use that as a way to beat ourselves up about, how we're living our life and what part of this we're participating in. So I'm grateful for that. And the reminder of, we can only do so much. We have this much energy, spend it in the way that makes the most sense for you. And for some people that will be completely different than their next door neighbor, and that's totally okay. Tanya, how about you?
Well, for me, perspective, that word has always been, it always triggers the thought of, when you're in it, when you're like in the depths of grief, it's very easy to lose kind of perspective, because you feel like you're the only one experiencing such tremendous sorrow, right? And for me, what I found helpful to give me courage to keep moving forward was to look at those others before me, or those others alongside me that were dealing with way more. So when I was like, why me? Why do I have to carry this burden? And it's not to diminish my burden, because it was, I had every right to feel that way. But at the same time, I needed that perspective of like, well, it's not just you, and you may not think that you're going to get through this, but look at your Tita Maribel, who was widowed with 3 children at your age, and she was able to move forward. Look at, the 2 mothers from the firehouse that Sergio was a part of, who lost 2 sons that day. She's getting up every day. If they can get up, you can get up, So it was about looking at the perspective of other people, that they were able to push forward, that gave me strength to continue to move forward. And also having community, even if it's just one other widow, to validate like how it is okay to feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, and that you don't have the energy to do a million different things in this time of like, selflessness that a lot of people are displaying. For somebody to be able to say to you, but it's okay, you're going through something so difficult right now, and you can handle just what you can handle, and nobody's going to hold that against you. I think that that's so important you know, in allowing ourselves to let ourselves off the hook for when we're beating ourselves up, you know.
Which so often is a
Yeah,
part of the grief
that's part of the
experience,
grief. Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that. And it gives me a good segue. First of all, I want to just remind everyone that the chat is open. So if you have any questions for our panelists, you're welcome to put those questions in the chat. Jenny's going to be keeping track of those so that we can make sure that we see them and that we're able to answer questions from our attendees. And then, so we're going to stay on for another half an hour or so. But I told our panelists we would keep them for an hour. So panelists, you have about 10 minutes and you feel free to step off if you need to, but of course you're welcome to stay. I will be staying on, and if you want to join me, you're welcome. But I understand that we have schedules and things going on in the background. So I just want to give you that heads up now. And I want to give everyone an opportunity to talk a little bit about self-care tools, your personal self-care tools, because I think that one of the things that living in the world right now has reminded me of is that sometimes we've got to come back to the basics. And when I think, what are my basics for self-care, I always go back to what comforted me during that time right after Phil's death, because it was such an intense time. And it was the time when it was the hardest for me to find comfort. And those comforting, what those comfort items were for me really has continued to carry through. And so I would like to ask each of our panelists what a self-care experience for you has been, and what you could share with us about your self-care. And I'm going to actually go backwards. So Tanya, can I start with you?
Sure.
There's something going on behind me, so I'm going to mute myself. Thanks.
Well, I'm a big fan of body work, and I know it's difficult now during the pandemic to, just get a massage and, or get your nails and feet done or whatever. But there are things that you can do for yourself. So if you go, on Amazon, who Jeff Bezos is going to be a trillionaire because of the pandemic, they have like these yoga balls, or you can get lacrosse balls. And that's something that for yourself, you just kind of lean up against the wall onto the balls, and you roll it around. That helps to loosen all the tension that builds up here. My friend Jenny, who's one of my closest friends, and she was my massage therapist also, she used to always say I was so tight here because I was always going from the crying. So she would always work on this spot. And I found that if I don't have a masseuse available, getting that yoga ball and going in there, digging deep, rolling on it, it releases so much, and it also keeps you present. Like, it's in the moment where you're focusing on your physical well-being. So I recommend yoga balls and stretching, those stretching ropes or a belt or something. Just doing something physical will bring you comfort.
I love that. I'm so glad you said it too, because for people who used massage through their grief experience and now find themselves completely unable, it's so frustrating. But really, those releasing the toxins in your back, even with you can even use a tennis ball. Any kind of, you can rub right up against the wall, and again, it comes back to that experience where we're like, okay, well, I can't have exactly what I want. I want my husband to be alive, right, but I can give myself this comfort or that comfort. And what I discovered was that the little comforts did matter. I mean, it seems so small in the scope of things, but that when I was able to find those small things, it did matter. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I'm also a fan of body work, and I can only imagine how hard it's been for people for whom that is one of their coping techniques, right, because right now it can definitely be unavailable. And so to be able to find, it's that adaptation, like, okay, I can't have that. What can I have instead? What can mimic that? So that's such a great suggestion. Thank you for that. Leslie, how about you? What's one of your self-care?
Getting away from my family, and having time alone. I know it's difficult, particularly there are some places. I have a friend from high school whose family is in Spain right now on sabbatical, and children were not allowed. I don't know if they're still allowed. For the first part of the pandemic, children weren't even allowed out to go for a walk. They had to be inside your house. So when you come from, kids going to school and you going to work and you literally having time to be yourself away from these people, and they're literally stuck in the house with them, it is very difficult. I'm fortunate enough to have an enclosed yard, and in Florida we've been able to get out and walk and stuff, and I live pretty close to the Intercoastal Waterway. But those moments, I make sure every day that I have a half an hour, 45 minutes to walk, or to take my bike out, or to, as I've been doing, binge The West Wing, in my room by myself with my door locked, and say to my child, because my mom's here too, I did not leave, I'm not abandoning you. But it's, and to also say why it's important for that. Because I'll say to him, I know you're used to being with your friends and stuff, but now you can't, and you're sick of me too. So if you need to go into your room without a screen and hang out and pay with your whatever, paint something, do whatever, that's cool, or 15 minutes of screen, but mommy needs that too. And to take literally the self part of the self-care and say, I need this because I can't function. It's the whole like putting your own oxygen mask on first. If I don't have time myself to think, to breathe, to have a glass of wine, to, this morning I walked and I was listening to all like, this playlist was very like 70s. And it's like, look, it's Anne Murray. I'm gonna walk. I'm listening to Anne Murray. No one else is working out to Anne Murray today, but I got to do it. And I didn't have to ask anybody. And yesterday it was Night Ranger. It was like all Night Ranger and Styx and Toto all the time. And that's my stuff. And so, yeah, just take some time away from people.
I love that. And especially because so often we don't give ourselves permission for that, to say, I need this time for me. And so I also want to acknowledge that for those of you that are home alone for the first time in, and maybe for months and months, that sometimes, needing that connection is also important, and making time for that and actually asking for that. And so again, like, wherever you are on the spectrum, if you find yourself, without regular contact with people, it's okay to say to someone, can we set up a regular Tuesday, or can we, have coffee in the morning, or can I, because it's okay to say, I need people, and and if you could be my person, even if it's this, at least we get to see each other. We get to have those interactions. And so, I feel like both sides of those coin are so important, to be able to say, I need to get out of here. There's too many people here. My sister is sheltering in place. She went from having one of her kids at home to 3 of them at home, and 2 of them are adults. And they don't have their own bedrooms because they weren't planning to come back. And so now she's sheltered in place. And every time I see her, she's got like people everywhere in the background. And like you, Leslie, like the other day she called from her bedroom. She's like, and so, it's necessary to give yourself what you need to be able to maintain your mental health. And in particular, when times are tough, being able to find those things that help you maintain your mental health are critical and not selfish. They're the level of self-care that rises to, I must do this in order to be able to be available to anyone else, including myself. So I love that, Go you. I like working out to Anne Murray. That's awesome.
It's good stuff, man.
Awesome. Tom, how about you? You're muted just to start with.
How's that? Am I live?
Perfect. You're live.
One of the things that my oldest son and I have agreed to, have come to an agreement on, is that we text before we call. And just a simple text, hey, is this a good time? Can you take a call? And that goes back to the shock of our sudden loss. It's just kind of a little bit of we are going to talk. Yes, we will, but it's not going to necessarily be an abrupt phone call. Now, something happens in a crisis, of course, but Michelle, I'd like to talk just for a moment about being widowed, becoming widowed, no matter what the circumstances that brought you to being widowed. This experience affects our finances. It affects our health. It affects our relationships. It affects our careers. It affects our spiritual outlook. It permeates us. That's the word. It's a visceral experience. The plan was to not lose our spouse, but it happened, and now that extreme experience has shattered us, or has shaken us, and the most important thing I've found is to just grow my awareness of what do I need. I need a good night's sleep. I need to rest and be quiet when I need to be rest and be quiet. There's no schedule, but when I feel like I need to withdraw or sit down or just be quiet. And I also recall, while everybody was sharing, that I did go visit the cemetery, the graveyard, within about 10 months after my loss for the first time. And I let out a primal scream that lasted a very long time. I just wailed. And it was just basically the confluence of the entire emotion of having everything happen within a short amount of time. Have I screamed like that again? No, I haven't. And I didn't know, I had no preparation, but I can tell you that it had a healing effect on me. So once again, I would just raise your awareness, grow your awareness. If you need to be outside more, go outside. If you need to be calling people, call people that you know. Or go over and say to a neighbor, hi, I just was wondering if, whatever, maybe, I don't know. But when you have to, I'm just suggesting that pay attention to what you need.
That's
And
right.
don't turn to a self-help book or an online something and say, well, they're going to write me a prescription. You have to write your own prescription and you have to fill it. Take as needed. Thanks.
Awesome. I love that, Tom, especially because I think that one of the key elements, and again, for everyone watching, I want to just remind you that what we're sharing is our thoughts and our experiences as they relate to our own widowhood. And we hope that it's going to bring up for you what your answers to these questions are. So, when we're talking about self-care, sometimes it feels like a big thing, but oftentimes it can be the smallest thing. I always tell people, my first, for sure, my first 6 months, my first cup of coffee in the daytime I felt like it was the only comfort I had. Like literally holding the hot cup of coffee in my hands was the only comfort I had. And so I have a real connection to that feeling of warmth and that feeling of taking a moment for myself to just enjoy what's in front of me and let go of all of the other things that, as Leslie mentioned, I'm not in control of. And, allow myself to be just present with whatever the comfort of the moment is. And I know for some people it can be as simple as, the right blanket or, the right sweatshirt or, the right show that takes you away from what you're living with in the moment. And so as we are all managing through this altered world in so many ways, coming back to the simplicity of what comforts me. So I want to ask you each the question, across our platform here to each one of the people who are watching, what comforts you? Because what the answer to that is, and day to day, it might be different. And maybe you're going to have to take a little bit of time to think about it. But I encourage you to do that because even the smallest amount of comfort can give us the motivation and the ability to move forward one step when that one step didn't feel possible prior to, listening to ABBA on your way, on your walk. And as Tom said, if the getting outside is something that's really critical for you, finding a way to do that even during this time, whether that's on the backyard or on the porch or on the balcony, or you're able to get out and walk or ride or go somewhere that you can be outside, but making the effort to do that is one of the ways we step through. So I want to give each one of our panelists an opportunity to, I'm going to ask you this question, and again, I will lead. If you need to pop off, please feel free, just wave at me and I'll choose you first. But I want to, okay, good. Leslie, we're going to start with you then. I just want to ask you, as you personally are making your way through this altered world, what is it about your widowhood that has made a difference for you personally, and in the way you're living in the world right now? So Leslie, that's on you now, since I'm not even going to model that question for you.
You know what it is? And it's so funny. Those of us who were involved are supposed to have been involved in the live version of Camp Widow Tampa. When it first was beginning to be, we weren't sure what was going to happen and things were beginning to close tentatively. And I think it was Kath, it was someone who said, well, you know, at first we thought, well, we're widows. We can deal with anything, because we didn't know how bad or long or how wide ranging this was going to be. But I think that what so many people have said is that surviving the things that we have survived has let us know that we can do that. So I've leaned into even when things seem sad and weird and hopeless and I'm lonely and, you know, forget dating right now, because you could kill someone if you kiss them. That's fun. So I'm single in it right now, but all of this tells me you can get through this if you wear your mask and wash your hands and, you know, don't go drinking with bunches of people and a party in the Ozarks. You can do this, and we can do this because we've done it before. And some other crappy thing will happen, like there were like the bees that were coming.
The hornets.
And Tanya will know right now, there's like the Saharan
Frogs.
dust coming. I mean, it's like, okay, God, we get it. We're going to die. But until that happens, we can get through this until it all goes crazy.
I love it. And it's true, right? I mean, we can and we will, and together makes a difference. And so I know you have to pop off, Leslie. So I thank you so much for being willing to spend this time with us. And thank you for every way that you support widowed people. And I am super proud of your book and proud of the work you've done.
Thank you.
And I'm glad you have a team, a community of people who also understand that experience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jenny. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
So Tanya, can I go to you next?
Sure. So wait, what was the question?
I was just talking about what about your widowhood have you really been able to lean into during these times?
Well, it's funny because I'm a regional leader here in Miami, and I have 2 widows in my group. And I haven't been able to do the Zoom thing with, you know, bringing in more people because I have my kids always in the background. But I've been able to focus my attention on these 2. And daily, I can't even tell you it just fulfills me so much to be able to say, you know, yeah, this pandemic sucks. Yes, you will get through this because you've already been through the hardest thing, you know, and you're not alone. We're here for you. So I think widowhood for me is all about community. It really is. And just knowing that, you know, we've gone through something so hard and so unimaginable, but we were able to survive it. And not only that, that we can create these moments again of joy and love and laughter, you know, and comfort. And I like what you were saying about just, and you, Tom, also about just like figuring out what it is that you need in that moment and not being ashamed to just give it to yourself, you know? Yeah, I think widowhood has just given me more of a self-assurance that I can handle anything and I know what to do for myself to get through any difficult moment.
That's the part that I think has been really comforting for me too, is just the sense that when you did the hard thing, here's what you learned that you need. And so when you're in another hard thing, probably you need the same things. So you just go back and you do it again and you realize, and maybe you've discovered some new things and there's new tools that you want to use and there's new ways you can take care of yourself. And that's great because that just adds to the ways you can take care of yourself. But I think the permission to take care of ourselves, the recognition that when we do care for ourselves, that is the best way we could ever care for anybody else. Because when your tank is completely empty, you have nothing to give. And, you know, having come to a place for me where my tank was completely empty for the first time in my life, truly, like I just felt like I don't have anything for anyone. And I had 3 kids at home and 3 stepkids who all needed love and attention. And I just thought, like, I feel like I have nothing. And when I had nothing, I had to put something in in order to be able just to care for them, first level, let alone friends and family and all the levels beyond that. So knowing what it's like to feel so empty and recognizing the value of filling that, for me right now, I feel like that's the message for everyone, is if you're feeling empty, you can't give back. You can't give to anyone when you've got nothing inside. And so being able to take care of yourself is so important.
But hearing it from others who are going through it, that's what we need. Do you know what I mean? Because you can have all of these thoughts and it's like, but I have to take care of myself. But then somebody says, yeah, you do. And you know that they totally understand where you're coming from. That's the power, that's the permission.
Absolutely.
You
That's the power. And hearing, like you said, sometimes we need other people's words, on our tape. So the tapes that go on our head when we hear Tanya said, yes, you need to take care of yourself. I do. I thought so, but I'm sure.
But it's okay to feel sad.
Oh,
It's
good.
weird. Okay, good. Okay. This is normal.
Absolutely.
Normal.
Yep. Awesome. What about you, Tom?
Muted.
Yeah,
How's
he's
that?
working on it.
There.
Am I on?
Perfect.
Okay.
You are.
Thank you both. And thanks for everybody out there who's in the middle of everything. The people that have been on the screen here, we're not experts and we're not the gurus of how to do this. But what I'd like to mention is the self-care of being gentle with ourselves. I want to focus just for a minute. I know that we are all surrounded by things, by objects, by stuff we've acquired as a couple or as a family, the photo albums and the books and the bicycle and the cars and the houses and the lamps and the whatever. And there's some awkward moments that you might face where people in your family circle or your friend circle may awkwardly say, well, what are you going to do with that? So I would just urge some caution there regarding making an abrupt decision to give away this, because once you give it away, you may never get it back again. And later on, you may wish that you had that item. I know it's such a small thing, it's a tangible object, but it's what people relate to, or it's awkward for them to approach us and say, how are you? And actually listen to your response. So they'll say, well, when have you decided to sell his truck? Or what are you going to do with his tools? Or, so just be real careful, put a filter up before you reply with an answer that you can't take back. Some people may suggest to you that you should go to a grief group, or you should read this book, or you should listen to this TED Talk. It'll help you. Well, if you go to the grief group, go ahead and go. But if you don't feel comfortable there, you can leave. You don't have to wait till the end of the session. If you go to a therapist or a counselor and it's not the right fit, you're not obligated to keep going to that therapist just because that's who you were referred to. So this all falls under the umbrella I'd like to close with, which would be gentle with yourself. I know other people will try to be gentle or walk on eggs around us or not say the wrong thing, but we have to be the guardians of our own sanity. And if something's not working for you, you don't feel obligated that I have to do this. So that's my thought. Be gentle with yourself. Thank you.
That is absolutely great advice, especially because in my experience, oftentimes we're the hardest on ourselves. My favorite thing to say to grieving people is to treat yourself like you would treat your best friend if they were going through the experience that you're going through right now, because we would offer them a lot of grace, and sometimes we're unable or unwilling to give that to ourselves. So I appreciate that advice very much. I want to close on this topic with a personal story. I'm actually in Australia right now. I've been in quarantine for 2 weeks to get to my mother-in-law because my father-in-law died almost 3 weeks ago. And when you think about your personal experiences with grief, my first thought initially was never, how will this end up serving me, years later, and in the ways that I'm able to speak to and care for people I love. But I had the experience of seeing my mother-in-law for the first time yesterday, and to be able to look right into her eyes and have her look into mine and her know, I know. And I only can know what I know, right? I only know about my own experience. I only know what it was like for me to outlive my husband. But the fact that she could look at me and know that I knew something of what she was living with in that moment, with no words at all, it was such a powerful reminder of what my grief experience has taught me, which is that we each live this in our own way, but that there is a community of grievers in the world. And when you have the opportunity to connect with them, that broadens your world immediately. There is a lifting of the weight off your shoulders immediately when you meet someone who understands in their own way. They can't live your experience, they don't know your experience, but they know their own, and they recognize in you the grief that you feel, and they know that you can see theirs. And that has been such a powerful, this last few days has been such a powerful reminder for me. Of course, also my husband's grief, but that unique sharing of a relationship where I know that she's grieving her partner. I know that she's grieving all of the ways, as Tom beautifully listed, the widowed experience touches every part of your life. It changes everything in some way. And we have to make our way through that. So what I want to remind you of at this time in the world is that you've already lived through something that's touched every single part of your life. And so while it may feel, and it may even be true that every part of your life has been impacted by the pandemic, or that every part of your life has been impacted by the reckoning, as Leslie brought out for us, of what's happening in the world right now, if it feels like everything about your world has changed, I want to remind you that everything about your world changed once before, and that you have stepped through it one step at a time, sometimes forward, sometimes back, sometimes sideways, sometimes, a sachet to the side, and it may not feel like you're going anywhere, but here you are making your way through, and we will make our way through each one of the challenges that life brings to us in the same way. And what I ask of you is to continue to seek community, to stay connected to others, because it is in our humanity that we are able to look into another person's eyes and understand what they're living with, and be able to share what we're living with. And as I said in the beginning of this workshop today, what I learned was that asking for help was not a weakness, it is a wisdom. And being able to say to someone, I accept your help, is a gift. And it is the opening to you being able to support them in the future. And so to be able to continually say, I allow people to come into my life to help me when I need help. And sometimes even when we don't know we need help, and yet here they are, offering a hand, accepting the hands that are reached out to you. Even in this time when, we're not shaking hands, it's a hand of any kind. And so I want to remind you that you've been there, you have done this already. And every step that you take forward is supported by what you've learned about yourself, and is supported by the ways in which grief has changed and altered you personally, and also the ways in which grief has changed and altered your world. I love that Tom shared about his agreement with his son that they would have a text message in advance of a phone call. That's just one beautiful example of how the life change, he can support himself, they can support each other through this by saying, I gently enter into this conversation, I choose this conversation consciously. And that may be different for you, but I ask you again, everything we've talked about today is intended to get you thinking about your own widowhood and how you can lean on it. Initially, I felt for sure that when widowhood was dropped into my life, it was not something I was going to be holding on to, and I did not want to count on it for anything. It felt like, this unwanted experience that was delivered in a very dramatic way, and I wanted nothing to do with it. And yet what I've discovered is that it's a pillar upon which I can lean time and time and time again. And that within our widowhood, there's strength, there is wisdom, there is perspective, there is survivorship, there is knowledge that was hard won but is there to be counted on. There are resources and tools. All of that forms this concrete sort of pillar on which we can constantly sort of lean in and say, okay, right, I have all that behind me, literally supporting me. And when hard things happen, you know how you sort of set back a minute? You know, I want you to imagine yourself sitting back on your widowhood and knowing that it's there behind you, supporting you. And everything you've learned and everything you've done and all the ways you've learned to take care of yourself, all sitting right behind you. And when you lean back, you feel that support behind you. And I hope you also have a community that feels like right there, you know, behind that pillar is a whole line of people ready to stand behind you. That is definitely the goal of Soaring Spirits. So if you've not yet connected with a widowed community, we welcome you. That is what we do. We stand beside each other. We witness for each other. We give each other the opportunity to be heard and seen. And in so doing, we provide that next level of support behind the pillar, which you created yourself. All of that is your own hard work. No one else can do that for you. No one else did do that for you. You did that for yourself every step of the way. And the beauty of that is not that you did it alone. So I'm not retracting what I said. It's not that you did it alone, but it is that you did it for yourself and you own those things. All of those things belong uniquely to you because you had to find your way through. And as I said, I hope that there's a community behind you as well. And if you've not yet connected, Jenny's done a great job of putting the programs of Soaring Spirits in the chat. So in the chat bar, you can connect with us if you've not yet found your community, or if you're ready for more community, we're here to welcome you. You'll find amazing people in our community like Tanya and Tom and Leslie and Jenny, who you can't see, but who's working screens back here and helping us stay connected. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity I've shared this time with you. I don't see that we have any questions in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and just double check that. And Beverly, Beverly's thanking us for our words today. Beverly, I'm so glad you're able to join us. And we welcome you and are grateful to be able to share what we've learned about widowhood. And so I'll ask Tom or Tanya, do you have any final words that you'd like to share?
I will echo Tom's sentiment, you know, is really be gentle with yourselves. That's first and foremost, and trust that you know what you need at any given moment. And that if you need a little help just kind of sorting it through, there is community that you can tap into or a trusted friend. It's to find someone that you can be authentically who you are in your grief with, I think is really good wisdom that I learned along the way. You have to be able to share your experience with somebody that can help validate those feelings for you. And just that nothing stays the same forever. You know, we experience really dark moments, but they don't have to last forever, you know, and with that, joy doesn't also last forever. So enjoy it while you have it. I think that's my 2 cents.
I love that. And I also want to just point out that I've been trying to remind myself through all of what's happening to welcome those moments of joy.
Yeah.
Because the hard stuff is coming anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And when you find that joy, take it and just revel in it for a minute. And if it lasts 30 seconds, it lasts 30 seconds. But it was a great 30 seconds. So
don't feel guilty about it.
Yeah,
take
let
it. Yeah.
that joy in, because you know, the hard part is going to be there, and you're gonna be needing to walk through the hard part anyways. But to be able to grasp whatever joy is available to you in any quiet moment or however long it lasts, it's such a gift, and it can sit right beside the hard stuff. They just are side by side, and in that, you know, you'll toggle between the two. But you know, that's always my hope, is that there is an element of joy within the hard, you know, within the parts that are dark, that there's some lightness, and that we get to stand in that light for a minute. It's important. So hang on to them when you have them. Tom, did you have any final words? Good.
I
Wait,
would
there you
say
go.
that reflecting on everything that's been shared and my own journey, there's so much. There's so many gotta-dos, and there's so many things that have got to be done, but they all don't have to be done now. I remember, on a very personal note, I remember some of our nieces were quite young when their aunt passed. And of course, they were totally unaware of so many things, including the circumstances and the involvement of another family member. And I remember one of the adults asking me, what am I gonna tell them? What am I gonna tell them about what happened? Well, if they're 4 years old and 5 years old or 7 years old or whatever age, or an infant, you don't have to come up with an answer now. And so everything does not have to be done now. So I'm not even going to say do one thing at a time, because sometimes that's hard to figure out what's the one thing, but don't try to do it all now. Thanks. Good luck.
That is such great advice. Go ahead, Tanya.
Great advice. I have one more thing. It's because it's ringing in my head. For all of you who are new to this widowhood journey and that are just afraid that you have to let go of your person, your love, and all of that, that you have to come to a point where you don't talk about them anymore or anything, that's not the case. I'm almost 19 years and I do this work in honor of Sergio. He's very much a part of my life today as he was back in 2001. So I want anyone who might be feeling that fear of having to let go of that to release it, because you get to keep your person with you for the rest of your life. You get to keep that love. And I think that was so important for me to hear early on. So that's, thank you all for being here. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like that's, it's a perfect ending, is that, every one of your panelists today, honors their loved one with this work and honors their continued connection to the person they love with this work, and being willing to reach out to another person. So know that, this ongoing connection you have with your person, that you get to keep to. And actually that's part of your pillar behind you, they're a part of that as well. And so we'll end on that note. I want to just also echo what Tom said. You don't have to do it now. I love that. So be good to yourself. Know that even in this time when, it's hard to know what the right thing to do is, you don't have to have all the answers today. Right. And if the information changes tomorrow, then tomorrow you can make another choice. And so free yourself from the expectation that living in the world today, we're going to know what the answer is for tomorrow. We may not know. But one of the things that widowhood has taught me personally is that not knowing doesn't mean I can't make it through. And so you don't have to know in order to move forward in your experience in your life. And you definitely don't have to know in order to welcome that joy. So we're so grateful to all of you for joining us. Again, thank you to Open to Hope for sponsoring such a beautiful day and including us in your day. To my panelists, Sonia, Tom, Leslie, I'm endlessly grateful for the beautiful light you all are in the world, and I thank you for sharing with us today. And on that note, I will say to all of you, thank you again for joining us. And remember that over at Open to Hope, that Zoom link is live all day long. There's lots of different workshops going on. I'm actually hopping over there myself to do another workshop in a few minutes. So please make sure you check in throughout the day. And I'll also say, if you feel like you can't do it all, not to worry. They're going to be recorded so you can come back and look at them again. So if you need a little break, take a break and know that they're going to have an option for viewing later, so you're not going to miss a thing. All right, you guys, thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
I'm so grateful to my panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Take care of yourselves, everyone. Be gentle with yourselves. Stay healthy.